Hi everyone, my name is Anuradha Kumari and I welcome you all to Scottish Summit 2021. Today I'm going to present on the topic Inaccessible Websites, It's Us, Not JavaScript. I would like to start by thanking all our sponsors, so ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Proximo 3, Redspire, Agilicis, Hitachi Solutions. Thanks a lot for sponsoring Scottish Summit. A little bit of introduction about myself. I'm working as a development specialist at MediaOcean. Miracle_404 is my Twitter ID and Anuradha15 is my LinkedIn ID. So if you would like to connect, I would really love to connect with you all and discuss more on technical topics. The topics which we are going to cover today. So we will take a look at introduction to accessibility and its importance. Then we will deep dive into how can we use JavaScript to enhance accessibility of our applications and websites. We will also see how to test for our accessibility using some of the tools and extensions. So let's start. The first question which comes in mind is what exactly is accessibility? So accessibility, which is also neuronamed as A11Y, where 11 refers to the number of letters between A and Y. Accessibility means making the resources and services usable by everyone. So why it is important? Because we want to create for everyone. So we create for the users, but there are different types of users and they all might not be using the web in a same way. They have different ways of using it, different devices, assistive technologies. So is our content accessible to all? As per WHO, World Health Organization, almost 15% of world population lives with some form of disability. This means almost 1 billion people around the world are living with some form of disability. And by not thinking about accessibility, we might be making the content not available to them or not operable by them. There are different types of disabilities, main categorized into visual, auditory, motor, cognitive. Whenever we talk about accessibility, disability is the first thing that comes into the mind. We have also heard some of the arguments like our user base does not contain disabled people, so we do not need to think about accessibility. But that is a myth and a wrong convention. Accessibility is not only for disabilities, it's for everyone and everyone benefits from it. Let's see at some of the situations. So when we build for accessibility, we build for disabled people and we build for more than that. For example, there could be users who are using our content on slow internet connection, or they are using smaller devices to access our content. So is our website or application accessible enough to provide them with all the support? And also there are situational disabilities like I could see properly, but maybe I am in a bright environment and I will not be able to read the content properly if the contrast and all is not managed properly. Then there are progressive situations. So let's say my senses are working fine right now, but as my age will proceed, will increase, they might start deteriorating. So I might start seeing less or hearing less, and I might need to use assistive technologies in future. So have I built my products in a way that they are still accessible to me when I need to use them using assistive technologies? So we need to think about all of these whenever we are creating something. In a nutshell, accessibility benefits everyone. Now, to the main question, how does JavaScript impact accessibility? So whenever we create something, we can create very beautiful and usable websites using just HTML and CSS. Now, JavaScript is something which brings dynamic nature to the web. So we could achieve many things when we add JavaScript to our websites. We could do lots of things, or as I said, JavaScript has lots of power. So I've been thinking about how to give a proper analogy of how JavaScript can impact the web or is impacting the web in a good way. So if you are Marvel fan, so you might remember this person, he's Thanos. So I am giving the analogy today of JavaScript with the Infinity Gauntlet, which he's wearing. So Infinity Gauntlet, so I tend to say that JavaScript is like Infinity Gauntlet. It helps tremendous power, and we can do almost anything with it. Now, as we say, with great power comes greater responsibility. If you remember, this guy, he used this infinite power, this infinity gauntlet, in not a good way. He used it to make half of the world population disappear. So when we misuse our power, then very bad things can happen, right? So whenever we are using JavaScript, it's our responsibility that we use it in a responsible way and use it for betterment of the world, right? So when you get a chance, be like this person, Tony Stark, like a Iron Man. So he also used that infinity gauntlet, but he used it for the greater good, and he used it to bring back all the disappeared people. So yes. So whenever we are using JavaScript, be like Iron Man, think about it, and yes, and use it in for greater good, and use it properly so that it helps people. So I'm going to discuss about 4 principles of WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So all the accessibility principles, they are based on these 4 principles on how we should create our content. So they are acronymed as POUR, or POUR, where P stands for perceivable, means that whatever we are creating, that should be perceivable by the users in at least one of the senses, by at least one of their senses. And then O is operable. Operable means then they should be able to operate that content. So if there is any action, they should be able to perform that action no matter what device they are using. So for example, if there is a button, so I should be able to click it via mouse as well. But if I'm using a keyboard, I should be able to access that and trigger the action via keyboard as well, and so on. Then U stands for understandable. Understandable means the information and the operation which we are providing, that should be understandable by user. Example could be, let's say there is a form. Now if form doesn't have any labels, then a person who cannot see, who relies only on screen reader to understand what to fill in that input, they won't be able to maybe understand that what they need to fill into that input if there is no label provided to them. So we need to make the content as well as operation understandable. The last one is robust. Robust means all our content, it should be interpreted correctly by different types of user agents, browsers, assistive technologies. So, and the technologies evolve by each passing day, so they still should remain interpreted, and they should be reliable. So they should be interpreted properly by all the different kinds of user agents, devices, and assistive technologies. Now today I'm going to show you 4 different demos of how we can create more accessible content using JavaScript. And the main assistive technology which I am focusing on would be screen readers and keyboard. So the users who use screen readers, they use keyboard. Mostly they use keyboard to navigate through the content on that web page. So let's see into our first example. So the first example is using semantic HTML. Semantic HTML means HTML which has some meaning attached to it. There are many semantic HTML elements and the native elements which are used to perform an action, like a button which is used to perform a call to action. Then there is anchor tag which is used for navigation. There are forms, there are checkboxes, and many others. So let us see through an example. What do I mean by using the semantic HTML? Before we see the example, this is a website which I want to show you. So it's named as Explore Accessibility, explore-a11y. I created it when I was learning accessibility, and I have added the examples over a period of time here so that it's for everyone in public, and everyone can come here and see the examples and learn more about accessibility. It's still in process, and I am adding new examples as I come up or learn about them. So the first example which we are going to see is semantic HTML, and we will see the button example. Now I said that using semantic HTML. So when we use semantic HTML tag like button, then all the accessibility is available to us by out of the box. We do not need to do anything extra. We create a button, we attach a click handler, and yes, it's done, and it gives all the accessibility features. But many times what we do, that whenever we have to create some fancy button or we need to use lots of styling or icons, we end up using non-semantic HTML tags for creating the button, like div or span. So if you see example here, these two buttons have been created using button tag, but the login button, that has been created using the div tag. Now when I use mouse, I can access all of this and I can perform all the action. But if I'm a screen reader user, so I will try to navigate it through keyboard now. So I press tab. So the keyboard users, they use tab to navigate between all the interactable element. And let's say I want to log in, I want to tab again. Now, as I tabbed, you see that the focus went directly from register now to cart, and it did not even consider login to buy as a button. This is the biggest disadvantage, because non-semantic HTML by default, they are not interactable. So the user will never come across this button, so they won't be able to operate it, right? So how can we fix it? Now the first thing, the first which I always suggest people, that use semantic HTML, and it's always possible. Most of the time it's possible to use semantic HTML tags to use these, and div and span. We do not need div or span to create a button. In honest opinion, but let's say we have multiple situations where we want to use non-semantic HTML to create interactive elements. In those cases, we need to take care of some extra things. So the first issue which I want to solve here is that user first should, like, perceive that there is a button there. So they should be like reachable to that button. For that, we can add a tab index. So if I say tab index equal to 0, now this button would be into the tab order, so user can now reach it. But this is not the end. Are they able to operate on it? So for operating it, so if it's a semantic HTML again, then they should be able to operate it seamlessly, even if they use keyboard, because keyboard accessibility is out of the box with all the semantic HTML. But since this was a non-semantic HTML, so the user won't be able to trigger the action via enter or the space bar press, right? So what the user needs to do, they won't be able to operate it. Now if they are not able to operate, then again it's of no use. So here JavaScript comes into the picture, and what we have to do, that we need to add an extra key down event handler. So by adding an extra key down event handler, and here I can check for that the user presses key. If they press only space bar or the enter key, then only I should make this code happen. Whatever code we have put it in the click handler, we can put the same here for key down, so that whenever the user are using their keyboard, like enter press or the space bar press, then also the action should get triggered. So by using this piece of JavaScript, we have made it more accessible. Now, in addition to it, let's say if the button was just an icon only, right? So if it was an icon only button, then there is no much information to the user. So here I want to tell you about ARIA. So ARIA, which is Accessible Rich Internet Applications, they have contained a set of roles, states, and properties which can be used along with the HTML to give more information to that HTML, to give more information to the assistive technologies, that, hey, this is the extra information which you can use and you can pass it on to the user. So for example, here this is a button. Now if I can see, I could see that, okay, this is a bulb, okay, bulb icon, right? But if I cannot see, what is the information I need the user to pass on to the user who cannot see, right? For that, what I have done here also, if you notice here, I have used button. I haven't used a div, and it's totally possible using button and using styling to make the buttons work properly. Now the icon, this icon has no such meaning for a user who cannot see. So what I have done a ARIA hidden true. When I say ARIA hidden true, this will not be exposed. This element will not be exposed to the assistive technologies. So like the accessibility tree, it won't be accessible to those. And then I want to say something like when I am going through this DOM structure using my keyboard or using my, screen reader, so I want it to pronounce something to the user so that user understand what that button is. For that, I have provided ARIA label. So when the user come across this button, then it will pronounce enable light mode. So the user will understand, okay, so this is the role of this button, or this is the action that this button will perform if I enter it or I press space bar on it, right? So we have given this information using ARIA here, and we can use JavaScript. So it's dynamic again. Since this is just an example, there could be multiple icons which we use for multiple different scenarios. This was just an example which also is dynamic. Why? Because when the user clicks one, now the role of button has changed. Now the action of button has changed. So now when I press it again, it will enable dark mode. So for that, I have used JavaScript, and I have just used click handler because we are using button. So I do not need to use an extra key down event handler. And here I just toggle it based upon what is the current state. So if the current state is dark mode, I say that, hey, now you need to pronounce the user that you need to enable light mode. And if it's in already light mode, then I will change the ARIA label to say that now the next time user comes here, the thing that you need to pronounce to the user is enable dark mode, and so on. So by writing this, these pieces of JavaScript, what we have done, we have made our content perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust for all different kinds of users. So yeah, good job when we do it like this. Second demo is keyboard accessibility. So as I said earlier, that when we use Semantic HTML, keyboard accessibility is free for us, like it's out of the box now. Now, these are for native HTML elements. What if we are creating some complex component which has multiple small components? For example, there is model, right? So model needs to open up. There are multiple like button, checkboxes, different elements, cross icon, everything is there, right? What do I need to do then? So in these situations, often we might need to handle the keyboard accessibility and handle the focus, proper focus management via JavaScript. So today we are going to see an example of model or a dialog box. So let's go to the example. Before that, I would also like to mention one more thing. We have an official website by W3C, which gives us guidelines on how to create any component. What are the accessible guidelines for it? So they are called Why ARIA practices. And here, if you see, there are multiple design patterns for all different type of components and widgets. Now let's see if to our example, which is for dialog or model. So let's go to it and see what should really happen. So we are interested in keyboard interactions. Let's go and see. It says that whenever a dialog should open, the focus should move inside any element on that dialog, whatever is interactable. Now, the tabbing and shift tabbing should move the focus to and fro within that model itself. And this is also termed as focus trap, that we will see shortly through an example. Also, if the user presses escape, the dialog should close. Now, these are some of the important things which our code should achieve, or which our dialog should achieve. Now, let us see. So here in the first example, what I have done, I haven't added any extra functionality through JavaScript and just created a dialog with bare minimum. Now, if I try to access it via keyboard, so I press tab and I go to the button which says add burger to cart. Now I press enter on this button to trigger the action, and it opens up a model. But if you see, the focus is still behind. So focus has not come on model. So it violates our first principle. Now I can see it, so I know that, okay, focus is still behind and model is open. But if the user is totally reliant on screen readers to understand what is happening on the screen, they would be confused, because they would have expected something to happen, but they still are on that button itself, right? So let's say I press tab again the focus is still behind, then I press tab again. Okay, finally I came to this model. Now I can perform any action and then add to cart. If by chance I press tab again, the focus still goes back and then it goes on. So it's very confusing for the user might lose their context. And also when I'm pressing escape, this model doesn't close. So it's highly inaccessible model, which works totally fine with keyboard, but sorry, with a mouse, but it doesn't work at all doesn't work properly with keyboard. Now let us see the accessible model example before we continue to see the code. So I press tab, I come to the button which is going to open an accessible model for us. I press enter, the model is opened, and if you see, the focus has also moved directly to the cross icon. So now the user has the context. They know that, okay, they are now in model, and if they press enter, this model is gonna close. I can press tab, tab, tab again, and it works totally fine. Now I am now on the last interactive element of this model. What if I press tab again? So let's see, I press tab again, and if you see, it just went back to the first interactive element. So this focus management, now the focus is not moving out of the window or out of the model, because the model is the current view of user right now. So they are not bothered by whatever is in the background. The only concern is what is on this model, and this works perfectly fine. When I shift tab, then it goes back to the last interactive element on this model. So user is not losing context at any point of this time. Now the last thing is I press escape, the model closes. Awesome. And also cherry on the top is that the focus moves back to the same button from where the user had opened, or when the user started their interaction. So now this doesn't let the user to lose context again. So they are totally in control of the context. They know the whole time what is happening on their screen. And this is a very nice model, which user will find it easy to use and like more understandable. This is more understandable, the flow of operations and everything. Let's see through code now. In HTML, I have button which opens the model, and then a div which has the role of model, some class names. Inside it, there are buttons and some content, right? Now we are interested in JavaScript part. Let's see. I'm querying all the buttons and models here. So let's jump directly to what happens when I open the model, right? So here is my open model.add event listener. So what it is doing, the first thing, if you see, is it is storing the reference of active element. So what is the current active element of document? That would be the button which opens the model. So it stores that in a variable called previous active element, and then it toggles the element, toggles the model. Toggle model just toggles the class names on the model to make it visible and invisible. Then now the model is open. The third thing which it does is it gets the focusable elements of model. So now here, what I'm trying to say, hey, now the model is open. Now give me all the interactive and focusable elements inside of that model. So for simplicity, I have just query selected all the buttons on it, but in real, there could be multiple elements, focusable elements on that model. We need to query them all. Now it will give me the list of everything. We had two buttons, so there would be two elements here, and I want to focus on the first of them. So I return 0th element of the focusable array, and then I will get the cross icon, that cross button. So I get that close button element here, and I will trigger focus on that. That's how that cross icon was triggered when I opened it. Now, when I close the model via maybe close model icon, or even if I'm submitting, I need to close after performing some action and so on. So what I'm doing here are that I'm toggling the model with focus restored. What does this mean? Let's see. So it first toggles model, that is, it again makes it hide, and then it brings previous active element into focus. If you remember, we had the reference of the button which opens the model that we had stored in this variable, and now what I am doing is I am focusing on that element. That's how the button gets focused when model closes. Now also we have this event handler for key down. So now we are interested in the focus management inside the model. For that, what we do, we take the model container and we attach the key down event handler into it. What do we do in there is we check if the user is pressing tab key. If they are pressing tab key, if they are pressing shift tab, then we need to move one step up the tabbable order, right? So, and if they press simple tab, then the next interactive element should get focus. Now here the main thing is that here what we are trying to do is we are checking that if user presses tab and I am on the last focusable element, then I am going to focus the first interactive element. And same, if we are pressing shift tab while we are on the first focusable element, that is the close icon, then we need to send the focus to the last focusable element, which was the submit button in our case. So this is how focus trap works. So this is the code for focus trapping within the model. And then also, when the user presses escape key, I want to close the model again with focus restored. So if you see this, this is such a beautiful piece of code. So by writing, and this is one of the approaches, there are multiple approaches to handle focus management and keyboard accessibility for models. This is one of them. And by using this extra piece of JavaScript, it does the magic and makes the model accessible for all different types of user, even the people who are using assistive technologies. Let's see the third example now. Third example is announcing the dynamic changes. So as we know, we use JavaScript to create all dynamic kind of things on our web page. So the main could be like whenever the form is submitted, then some response comes back, that's dynamic. Some notification comes and it's shown to the user, that is dynamic. Whenever the navigation is changed, then the view gets changed, that is also dynamic, right? So when these things happen and when we see it, in that case, we know everything, we have the context, but the user who is using a screen reader to understand what is happening on the screen, again, they might not be able to understand unless and until we let them know that, hey, this is happening, right? This is where announcing details comes into picture. And it can be done via two ways. The first one is the role of HTML. So it's in HTML and you can use role on any HTML tag, and whenever any content will get appended to it, it will be spelled out by the screen reader, or it will be announced by the screen reader rather. Or we could also use ARIA for it. So there are ARIA live reasons, and we could have something called polite, and then it will also announce the changes to the user. When we use these, we should also be extra cautious. I have linked the MDN documentation here. You can read, it's a very good documentation. You could always read about it to see when to use this and in what situation should we avoid this. But the rule of thumb is, if there is an important announcement happening, or if there is an important notification or a status which user needs to be aware of, we should announce it to the user so that the user understands. So the user who is using screen reader, they understand that, okay, this is something which is happening. Now I'm going to show you examples. So we have a same form and we have two examples, inaccessible and accessible. So we have one form where if user enters some text to it, if it's valid, let's say there is some text valid string in it, then it submits with the value of that string and it gives me a success message. But if I just enter some space in it, so it's not a valid string, and if I submit the form with that, it's going to give me some error. Now, if you see, if I can see here, so I submitted and I got an error, right? And if you see the accessible example, this also works the simple way. For us, it's fine. But what if the user couldn't see? What if I couldn't see and I'm using a screen reader to edit this form, to like fill details in this form? In that case, whenever the success or error message comes in, I need to be aware of that what is the error or success that came in, right? So let's see it through an example. This is the example where we did nothing. So this is inaccessible example. I have just a div for it and it appends the message to it. I will show it. I have created small clips for it to show how it behaves when it's read via screen readers. So here, let's see what happens when I try to add some invalid string. Space. So if you see, the user submitted a form, the error message came back, but there is no announcement to the user. So as a user, I might still be waiting. So, okay, I don't know if it was success, it was an error, or it's still in like submission process. I do not know that. So it's confusing. Now let's see what happens if I use ARIA live reasons.
Space. Error submitting form. Please enter valid text to proceed.
So if you see here, as soon as the error message comes, the screen reader announced it to the user that, hey, there was an error and the text is not valid. So as a user, I understood that, okay, I put some invalid text. So let me put some text. So I am putting some text.
Oh. Form submitted successfully with text hello.
So since I knew that the text was not valid, I tried again with a valid text and the success message came this time, and this was also announced. So as a user, I'm happy now because I know that my form has been submitted. So let's see once the code, how we can handle it, and you will be surprised that the code is so short. So for that, in the div, which is using that submit status, that message is getting appended to the div. In that div, what I have done, I have just attached the role of status and ARIA like polite. So actually using only one of these will also work, but then MDN suggests that we should be using both of them so that we get more compatibility when we are using different types of browsers and user agents. So I've used both here. So role of status and ARIA life equal to polite. And in JavaScript, what I have done that whenever the response comes back here, what I'm trying to do is I'm appending the error message or success message depending upon whatever text was entered into that input box. So this is all I do in JavaScript. I just append that text into that live reason, and this trick does all the magic, the role of status or ARIA live, and they pronounce it to the user. So rule of thumb, if there is something important you need to make the user be aware of, then you need to announce it so that the users are aware that, okay, this thing happened. So the last example for today is respecting user device settings. Now there are multiple accessibility features and all the devices, all operating systems, mobiles, everything, they have device settings, different device settings, which enable the users to use accessibility features. So that today we are going to see about animation. Now animation, it makes our website look beautiful. It's very eye catchy and it might make user visit your website again and again, but not all people love animations. So let's see the example of animation. There are some people with conditions like vestibular motion disorder. Whenever they see animation, they feel uneasy. So they find it troubling to watch the animation. And also it has been found that using the flashy and lots of like rapid moving content on the screen, it gives uneasy feeling to lots of people. And it also is triggering for multiple factors, like let's say migraine. So there are settings in everyone's devices in which they can say that, hey, I do not want to see animation. So let's see, I am on Windows right now, so I will be using Windows settings, but it's on all, and you can always search how to enable or disable animation or different device settings. So what I'm doing, I'm searching for animation in my Windows and I got this settings box. So this is accessibility settings, and here you can see that there is something called show animation in Windows, and by default it is turned on. It means I don't have any preference, so I want to see animation if they are there. And in this case, as you can see, there are some very basic animation on my website. So yeah, it's very small, childish, so that's okay. So everything is working fine. So animation is getting shown. Why? Because I don't have any preference. I want to see animation if they come, right? So that's fine. But let's say I don't want to see animation. I have some condition. I don't feel easy when I see animations and so on. So I will go ahead and turn the animations off from these settings. Now, if you see, okay, ideally we do not need to refresh this, but sometimes it doesn't work properly, and especially when I'm giving demo, it never works properly. So okay, come on, stop showing the animations. Let me duplicate and close this. Yeah, so if you see here, now the animations have stopped. So if I had the settings that I do not want to see the animation and I came here, the animation is stopped. But if I had not done that extra code, then the animations would still be shown, and it might not be a good user experience for the users. So in a nutshell, we should always respect users' settings, and if they have something said that, hey, I do not want to see animation, that means we should not show them animations. How we can achieve it? We can achieve it via two ways. First one is using CSS media query. We have a media query called prefers reduce motion. So if the user has no preference for it, then we can go ahead and add animation in that media queries. So this is the way which I prefer, is that I add all the animation code inside this prefers reduce motion media query. So what this will do, that when user has no preference, then only will it add these animations, else it will just not add this animation. But rarely is animation so simple. Most of the times we have very heavy, even JavaScript code written to perform some sort of animation and so on. In those cases, JavaScript code might come in handy. So here also it's a one-liner. So we have a match media which checks for this query, prefers reduce motion dot matches. Now this will be true only if the user has set it to false. If user says that I do not want to see animation, then this will be true. So what we can do, that we can see that, okay, user has chosen not to see animation. In that case, we won't do anything. But if user has no such preference, go ahead and add all the animation code and things like that. This is also helpful if we want to do show some replacement when user doesn't want to see animation. Let's say we want to show some static picture. In that case, we could also do all those kind of handling within this code. So this is how JavaScript can really help us with respecting the user device settings. So we have seen now 4 different ways in which we can make the content more accessible for everyone. Now, just coding is not enough. We need to also test. So let's see how can we test for accessibility. So the first thing which we can do is use only keyboard to test the functionality. So just unplug the mouse and use keyboard to test the functionality which is on your website, and see if it still is in natural order. So if the flow looks good, if all the interactive elements are reachable by keyboard, are they operatable? I mean, are they operable by it, and so on. Then screen readers. So using screen readers might be little daunting at the start. There is a learning curve in using screen readers, but it's worth the time. Take out some time to learn how screen readers work, and then try to navigate through your website using screen readers. It's really worth it, because it will let you know how users really use your application, and it will also help to understand from their point of view and to understand their pain points. So it's definitely worth the effort and time. Then there are different tools and extensions which we can use to audit our website. So we will see shortly how we can test for accessibility using these tools and extensions. Also, all these type of testing is fine, but we should always consult and take help from the real users, because nothing beats nothing is more useful than having the feedback from the real users. They will be able to give us the honest feedback on whether our website is accessible or not. Does it work? Does it not? So always consult real users. I have listed some of the screen readers. They are available for all different type of operating systems. I am using NVDA. You could use any one of these depending on your operating system. Then the tools and extensions, how to audit using tools and extensions. There are many tools and extensions available which help us to audit our websites to see if it's accessible or not. The main one are like Lighthouse, Axe extension, Accessibility Pane. Let's see some of these through the example. So I'm going to audit my website. I will use model. So the first one which we are going to use is by Google Lighthouse. So if you right click on it and inspect, this DevTools get opens up, and here there is an option called Lighthouse. I go to the Lighthouse and I guess yes. And here what I want to do is just, there are multiple things which you can audit it for. I want to audit it for accessibility. I say I want to audit it for accessibility and desktop device. So generate report for it. It reloads the page and generates the information, and it gives a very good information, a list of accessible things and what are the rules that we broke, what are the rules which we followed, like the accessibility rules which we followed. It also gives information for that also. And since this automated testing is not enough to understand the full accessibility picture of our website, so it also gives us some manual steps, like some steps which we could use to manually test the accessibility of this application. So yeah, it's still generating. Looks like my internet is quite slow. So yes, but yeah, it gives very good information on it. And there is also one more extension which is called Axe, which is by DQ. They both work on the same principle, which is actually I guess by Axe only, and they both give. They operate on the same principle, so the results are similar, just the way of presenting is different. You could choose to also install Axe, and also the third extension which you could install is Wave. So Wave gets installed as a browser extension here in the top right corner, if you can see. And similarly, when we can audit a website by using this Wave as well. Okay, and it is taking a lot of time. Why? Let me try again. And while it's still loading, I can tell you about the other ones as well. So there is one No Coffee which I really use. So it's a vision simulator. It simulates your screen depending upon different kind of vision impairment and color contrast and so on. So it's also a good extension to have on our browsers, and we should install these extensions. So I always keep them installed so that I could always check it. If they are there, then my eyes will go there and I will definitely audit it and check it. So now my page has loaded, so I hope that this time the report gets generated and we really get to see what were the different issues in it. Okay, so while it's loading, I can also try going to Amazon and see if I could. I mean, I just wanted to load another website to see if we could audit that website. Okay, I inspect it here. I go to the lighthouse. Wow. Oh yeah. So that's okay. The response came here, and okay, here the score is 100, but don't always believe on the score. Also look at all the manual checks that we need to do, and they also give information on what has passed and what has not. And then the other one is like elements, which I want to show you. This is by default in the dev tool, so we are in elements, and then there is this accessibility pane here. So if you inspect any element, so let's say back to navigation, it gives the accessibility tree here, and it gives you information whether it's focusable or not, what is the ARIA label, and so on. So this is also a good thing to understand accessibility of an element. So back to presentation. We have seen how we can audit for accessibility. So to summarize, whenever we are creating something, always ask two questions. Can users access it? If yes, does it have the ability to be usable? If the answer to these two questions is yes, then you have done a very good job, and I'm sure you have created an inclusive and accessible website for all. Focus on accessibility just as everything else. And to make this world an inclusive and accessible for everyone, we need your help. Every one of us matter. So I have two action items for you. Pass on the learnings if you have learned anything today, and also let's spread the awareness so everyone gets to know that how can we create inclusive and accessible websites. So you can scan the QR code or go to the link and you will get all the details of this talk and the materials. So these are the resources which I used today to create this presentation and demo. All the videos will be available on the YouTube after 15 days, after 14 days. And so stay tuned and thanks a lot. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.